Hello, all, and welcome to another interesting episode of your informative knowledge sharing program, Global Insight. Today, we want to answer the question if Africa is trapped in global diplomacy, and of course, with a panel of experts, we're going to look at the various indicators or principles actually guiding international or global democracy in present day society while answering the question, is Africa trapped in global diplomacy? The sentiment that man is born free but everywhere in chains applies to the African context, as many nations that gained independence 50 to 60 years ago still grappled with the lingering effects of neocolonialism and diplomatic obstacles hindering their progress. This raises a crucial question: are Africa's roles in global diplomacy limited by historical, economic, and political challenges, or is the continent poised to assume a more influential position on the global stage? Global diplomacy involves, therefore, managing relationships and negotiations between nations to promote cooperation and mutual benefit, and its significance is heightened or highlighted in an era of rapid globalization. Africa, with its 1.5 billion people and abundant natural resources, stands at a critical juncture. Historically, Africa's engagement in global diplomacy has been constrained by colonial legacies, economic hardships, and political instability, among others. However, growing diplomatic interest in Africa presents an opportunity for the continent to assert its agency and shape global norms and policies. In our discussion thus day, we will examine whether Africa is truly trapped in global diplomacy, or if its nations or African nations are maneuvering towards a more empowered role internationally. While challenges abound, the potential for redefining Africa's standing in global affairs remains significant. Notably, examples include, South Africa's case against Israel at the International Court of Justice, Africa's collective engagement in the Ukraine crisis, responses to former U.S. President Donald Trump's policies, or very harsh policies against African countries, and also the explosion of France from Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and we also look at some of the diplomatic tendencies which have probably affected ECOWAS and other regional bodies across the African continent. These and more are some of the examples where we've seen Africa in present day society being involved diplomatically in issues of having global ramifications. It should be noted that the African Union has actually declared the year 2025 as the year of reparations, justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations, assessing how Africa can therefore internalize its values and aspirations of its people in vital, or being vital, I beg your pardon, for forging a sustainable diplomatic future on the international stage. This is Global Insight. You're most welcome. Welcome once more. A win-win partnership has become a mantra of many African countries, but then how practical is this, how feasible, and then how can African countries actually make practical this mantra by opting the diplomatic gains? Is Africa truly trapped in global diplomacy? The question that we're going to answer. Without much ado, let's uncover the panel of experts that will throw more light into a topic for discussions this day, which will actually go around areas of politics, economy, culture, geopolitics, and what have you. Let's right on straight away. Let's go to Moscow. We are being joined by ARNAUD, who is a political consultant and also doubles as an international lawyer. Welcome to the program this day, ARNAUD.
Yes, hello, Clarice. Thank you for having me. I hope to have a interesting discussion today on a very relevant issue, which bears on, if I understand the topic, the somewhat absence and or ostracizing, I guess, would be more of a accurate description of the situation of the African continent in global diplomatic processes. Because we all know about the regional diplomatic processes, but yes, I think there's a legitimate question here as to why isn't Africa more present in global fora? So I hope to have an interesting discussion. I'm looking forward to such a discussion with, of course, the panel.
Indeed, looking forward to having a compelling discussion that will widen the horizon for diplomatic engagement across the African continent. And to Germany, let's welcome Priestley EKANE, international relations expert. Hello to you, Priestley.
Hello, Clarice. Thank you for having me, and thank you for giving us the platform to discuss a topic that I find quite relevant in the era of conflicts and political discourse from north to south. I think we cannot overemphasize the need for the peoples or the shapers of Africa's governance and Africa's diplomacy to be in this global stage of decision making. So it is my honor to be on your panel today and to share the panel with the different luminaries as we have here today. I'm looking forward to an exciting exchange.
Absolutely, an exciting exchange that will also ignite change across the diplomatic lines in Africa. And of course, to Canada, we are being joined by Dr. ENOAKU, Director of Center for Africa Development. Welcome to Global Insight this day, sir. I think we are going to join ENOAKU. Probably he will join us subsequently. Yulia BERG is also joining us from Russia. Hello, Yulia. If you're there, you're welcome. To note that she's a political scientist and also a founder of GLOBUS Expert Club. Just been informed that she will be joining us subsequently. Without much ado, we're going to have the contextual understanding of our topic for today, which actually asks the question if Africa is entrapped in a diplomatic or global diplomacy. Riding off with you, ARNAUD on the contextual analysis of our topic for this day. What do you have to say regarding this in light of growing influence of non-Western powers? What legal frameworks generally and even geopolitical frameworks need to probably to be done to better accommodate Africa's interest in diplomatic processes?
Well, I think you actually touched an important topic in your question when you said to accommodate. Unfortunately, in the context of international relations and power politics, the term accommodate does not quite fit, unfortunately. This is not a civil society in the premier sense, in the classical sense of it, but more of a fist fight, gladiatorial arena. And so in order to be taken into account, you have to bring something to the table. And I would surmise that Africa is starting only now the second phase, in that sense, of the era following decolonization, which is to reclaim its sovereignty. And in order to reclaim sovereignty, you need to enforce national security to preserve your economic assets, not only to preserve them, but to reassert control over them, since the neo-colonial period following the 1960s was characterized by the captation of those resources by the former colonial powers. So this is what we're seeing now, and this is actually what I would surmise characterizes what we saw yesterday, which, I mean, I was flabbergasted when the head of state of the country of Liberia this was absolutely surreal. I mean, I thought we were back like in the 1920s or 40s or what have you. And so this scene, this surreal scene in the White House with Donald Trump somehow, wondering, in amazement how a head of state, which shows that Donald Trump doesn't even know his own history, his own U.S. history, because Liberia is part and parcel of U.S. history. I would invite our listeners and viewers to look it up. And so, in that sense, it was somewhat surreal for Donald Trump to express amazement that the head of state of Liberia would actually speak English, when Liberia was an experiment whereupon some people who had been brought against their will on the slave ships in the triangular slave trade decided to go back to Africa and found their own country there. Yeah. So, this is absolutely flabbergasting, but it shows how long the road is still going to be. And again, respect is not demanded, it's not requested politely, it's wrestled away from those who would be tempted to deal with you on equal footing. So this is pretty much what I have to say in introduction. You have to consolidate your sovereignty in the premier sense of what sovereignty means, meaning you need to probably, and concretely speaking, nurture and hope to see what happens with the AES expand outwardly throughout the continent. It's going to take a while, but the fundamentals are solid. And go from there, and you will see that the diplomatic fora will open to Africa quicker than you can expect it.
Absolutely, it's about mastering the game and knowing how to navigate this. And subsequently, before the end of the program, I think with you, Arnaud, we are going to understand the real terminologies to use when dealing with strategic issues, especially as diplomacy is concerned. And in the same light with the contextual analysis or understanding of our topic this day with you, Priestley, EKANE, how has the present status quo, especially along political instability or even a conflict across the African continent, probably impeded cohesion in diplomatic strategies at the probably international stage?
Thank you once more for having me. I think the question in itself as to why has why is Africa trapped? I don't know if it's the appropriate terminology to say they're trapped, but the question why Africa cannot be much engaged on the diplomatic scene comes with a lot of complexities, mostly structural and systemic complexities, and it is rooted in Africa's Africa's story and evolution. And by saying that, I think about the shackles of colonialism still very much present on the continent. I mean, when I mean on the continent, on the many countries that make up the African continent. I think about because the colonialism came with a lot of negative ramifications, especially the extractive ideology, Western extractive ideology that had to shape the political and economic realities of most of these countries. I think about also the influence of foreign powers. Who were mostly foreign colonial powers, and today, and also the fact that colonialism left an unsettled conversation regarding borders and security and sovereignty. So all of that plays against Africa's will and readiness to join the global diplomatic setup. And you cannot engage on the basis of legitimate power when you are not able to build a sense of power within, meaning most of these African countries have not been able to have the bargaining tool to engage the train of global diplomacy. Bargaining tool is sovereignty. Bargaining tool is professionalized military. Bargaining tool is a stable and strong and resilient economy. Bargaining tool is the social cohesion and strength within these countries. So that is lacking in most of these countries that make up the continent of Africa. But we cannot tag the process as doom. There's been progress. There's been albeit slow, but we see and we notice that there has been some strides. There has been some voices, and probably maybe not on the large global diplomatic scale, because when we talk about global diplomacy, we talk about diplomacy, and I like to talk about diplomacy of clubs, because we are in a context of club diplomacy. We have the G20s, we have the G7s, we have the G20s, and for example, when I take the case of the BRICS, we see that a country like South Africa is projecting its voice. Others might think, okay, it's insignificant, but that's already something. Excellent. And also within the sub-regional groupings, we have countries like Senegal who are projecting their voice within these sub-regional groupings. But I think that's a quest for a certain legitimacy, and it starts within this regional fora in order to progress to continental and global fora. And I think it is a process. It is a shame that when decisions are being shaped on the large scale, on the global platforms, maybe Africa is trailing a little bit on the back, but certainly they have the bargaining tool, because they own the resources, they own the population, and it can only make sense if they can utilize, if they can instrumentalize what they already have and use it as a bargaining tool for a legitimate voice on the global scene. And I think that's possible. It could be slow at the moment, but it would be possible.
Absolutely, it's a sort of a process and understanding, like we already highlighted. Understanding of the game will make you to be a perfect player. We welcome again YULIA BERG, a political scientist and founder of GLOBUS Expert Club. Today's a very important program where we want to look at diplomacy and also look at the position of Africa at this juncture. Because if we see today, Yulia, in across the global world, let's look particularly what is happening in Europe. There is some sort of diplomatic contestation. And we want to now understand, probably ask this question: if what is happening in Europe has helped Africa to get a wider horizon about how the diplomatic game is played, and probably time for it to navigate it for its own interest.
Well, once again, the world is at a bifurcation point, meaning that the system that used to be quite stable for a while has shown that it's not matching today's realities. And we see that many countries of the African continent are not happy with the role they play at the international arena. So the realization comes in that that it logically doesn't make too much sense that the continent so very rich in resources and the continent so very rich in human potential remains one of the poorest regions in the world. So reflecting over the EU policy towards Africa and analyzing basic numbers like the benefits that some of the European countries are getting and what they actually put in, it is very much clear that the system of relations is quite disbalanced. And then when we go through various facts, some of which were just mentioned in today's conversation as well, we understand that this policy was based on throwing some kind of remains from the profits made off the continent back to the continent, and basically trying to suppress any kind of sovereign behavior on behalf of leaders of the African countries and Pan-African leaders themselves. So just recently we could see the example of Nathalie Yam, who got under sanctions just simply because she was speaking the truth, basically. And it's one of the cases showing the repression mechanisms that are being applied once someone's rhetoric is not matching the official or desired narrative, let's put it that way. Because if we come to a point when leaders that try to perform some kind of reforms, just like Gaddafi and many others, are just being assassinated, and that is being demonstrated as an attempt to promote some kind of humanitarian values or democracy or whatsoever else. When we see that people cannot even really speak their minds, when we see that the policies still aim to control the economy, aim to control the decision-making process, it can be wrapped up into any kind of nice-looking package of development, of sustainable development, of democracy or whatsoever else. But simple analysis of basic numbers and simple analysis of facts would lead us to quite sad conclusions. So this could not have been lasting for too long, and it's just that bifurcation point at the moment that would really define if the African leaders could actually unite in that thinking, or if they could act separately in order to have the role that the countries play in the international arena corresponding to the actual value that they're bringing into the global economy as well, and the global, let's say, the humanity itself.
Absolutely, yeah. And in the same perspective, going straight away to Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, we know that we are in a period of some sort of, we can call it shifting or new alliances. So, in your own perspective, Dr. ENOAKU, what should Africa's internalized diplomatic strategies be to be able to meet up with some of these obstacles hindering the continent from having its real scope or space at the international arena?
Hello, Clarice. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, sir.
Yes. Sorry, my connection has been a problem. I think Africa, I know lots of people might not like to hear what I want to say, but I still have to say that Africa has itself to blame in this kind of atmosphere in which we find ourselves. Because when you're going to the bargaining table, they say he who goes to the bargaining table must know where he or she is coming from. If you don't know where you're coming from, that's where you get caught up in a web like this, what we're currently going through in Africa right now. Africa need to understand what their priorities are. Africa need to foster what their priorities are. If you know what your priorities are, you will know what global alliance you're going to go into. You are going to know what global alliances you should not go into. Every country in the world, let's say even continent in the world, the way the game is played now, they want to play to their advantage. And by doing that, they look at alliances all over the world, whether it is NATO, whether it's the BRICS, whether it's South-South cooperation, whether it's a transatlantic, whether it's AGOA, it doesn't matter what it is. You look at what is going to be, you work from a competitive advantage point of view. That's the point I'm trying to make. So Africa need to understand what is their competitive advantage. Because when you are going into a negotiation from a weak position or an alliance from a weak position in which you are trying to use somebody to show up your own interest, when that person's interest is not being guarded for, that person will leave you in the middle of the sea. Africa is relying on a group of countries right now and say, oh, let me let the cat out of the bag. Maybe Russia, maybe the United States, maybe Eastern European and so on. Or we're going to go behind them to see how we can shore up our resources, shore up our security, shore up this and that. But what happens when the interests of those countries which Africa is relying on, it's not guaranteed? They're going to abandon Africa in the middle of the road. So Africa must understand what alliances they should go into. Africans should understand what geopolitical interests they should be aligned to. It's not just because we find ourselves dealing with imperialists that we say we want to fight imperialists. Therefore, this country we cannot work with. This country we cannot work with. You've been an imperial country. You have imperial policies. You've colonized us in the past. You've done this, you've done that. Therefore, we cannot work with you. If you use colonialism as a sole goal, as a sole tool that is guiding who you work with, who you do not work with, Africa is going to find itself at the doldrums or at the mercies of other countries in the world. Africa needs to be strategic. What do we want? What are our goals? Why are we aligning with, global conglomerate A or such an organization B or BRICS or NATO or South? Why are we doing that? Is it because we are running away from country A that we feel that have been, impounding on our resources for so long, and we can't even go on the table and negotiate with them and say, we cannot work with you because you've exploited our resources for so long, you can't do this. We just cut off that relationship and say, one work with country C, one work with country D, but there is no platform on which we are going to work with country C on. So Africa must understand what their objectives are. They must understand what their strong points are. They must understand what their competitive advantage. I keep using that word. competitive advantage. Because if you go to any alliance from a weak position, you are going to be towed around all the time. That's what we see all across Africa. So just giving you a prelude of what I want to say here is that Africa must understand what are the goals of any global alliances that are going into. What are the intentions of those global alliances? How do they benefit Africa? From that perspective, Africa will be able to chart a new global perspective that is not being tied to A or B or C, but is tied to the interest of Africa. That should be the platform on which Africa should work.
To the question on how Africa can navigate these very complex times diplomatically. I think, Yulia, you may want to comment to this viewpoint of Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, which I think is something that wants to bring us to ask the question, at what level can we rate Africa's diplomacy, especially of interference and mediation lately, also probably of new alliances, like he underlined. Many African countries have actually, ended or in the process of ending diplomatic engagements with colonial powers and taking new alliances with countries that actually helped the continent during the fight for independence. But then how can we navigate this very complex era for the African continent to ensure that in wanting to choose diplomatic partners that are very favorable for the continent, they will not make a mistake of probably finding itself trapped in another era of conquest?
Well, in my personal opinion, or in my opinion as of a person who has been, quite deep into those issues, what I can say is that the diplomatic layer is great, and there are quite a lot of efforts and quite a lot of steps made at the diplomatic level. But there are the fundamental basic areas that have to be taken care of, and those are such things as economy, infrastructure, governance, and so on. And whatever statements are being made, if there are no approaches to actually improve the quality of infrastructure, ensure sovereign decision making in terms of economy, and those very foundations of every state, like the legal system, institutions that would guarantee smooth political transit, and a more structured, let's say, social and political life, then the construction would still be very shaky. And in my understanding, what else has to really change is the eternal wait for the investment, as if at some point it would just rain money over the continent. So what is quite disappointing to observe is that even though Africa is probably the richest continent in terms of not just mineral resources, but also the agricultural potential, the human potential, and so on, there is still the the feeling that that investment would save everything. And there is still quite a lot of attempts to become more attractive for investors, instead of trying to see how to make the money out of what is already available, how to establish trade in a way in which it would be more beneficial, how to establish production by attracting partnerships rather than investors per se. So that approach is changing in quite a lot of locations, and there is quite a different understanding in some of the cases of how it could be different. But this wait for investment and this wait for when it rains money, it already implies being in quite a submissive position and quite dependent position. this has to be, you know, taken into consideration, because otherwise systematic issues would not be fixed, and the diplomatic layer would not really come down to reality, because, you know, the fundamentals are the economy, the let's say governance, and infrastructure. Without this, it's quite impossible to ensure stable and high quality life for the people.
And I think that is what actually is important in this juncture. And looking at some of these historical hindrances with you, Arnaud Doubly, it is good that probably you're from France, and we know how lately the diplomatic relationship between France and many African countries have been, particularly countries of the Sahel region. So in your own perspectives, because we want to look at maybe some of those problems, and then how African countries can navigate this entanglement in contemporary society to ensure that while drifting, they should be doing that institutionally, probably as well, to make it more practical. We are seeing the revolution in Africa threatening France. Do you think the diplomatic move to cut ties with France suffice without having clear, policies that will write a new, probably a new phase of how, if should Africa wants to engage with France, it should probably what can make the preamble of that relationship to ensure that there is diversity in a diplomatic partnership across the continent?
Well, I guess as far as the relationship between some of the countries you mentioned and France is concerned, the priority is to basically remind France that the good old days are over with and they're going to come back. There's no issue, I mean, to the extent there's a historical relationship between a large swath of Africa and France on a cultural and linguistic level. The dynamics of bearing on economic captation of some of the resources of those countries is essentially the heart of the matter in as far as this current cooling of relationship between those countries and France. There's nothing fundamentally dividing France and those African countries ultimately as far as cultural exchanges and a shared history, and this is something that will need to be built on in the future, but not under the framework of what France would like to impose. And what Dr. Elias was talking about earlier, in that sense, rings a bell, is that there's no there's no imperative for Africa to distance itself per se from certain countries on the account that they were once colonial powers. Diplomacy and international relation as such is predicated on interest and interest only. Sure. And so to the extent there is something down the road, once this relationship is cleared up in as far as the predicate and the perception of each other in this new era is concerned, there's no reason for business and ties to be reinforced down the road. But for the time being, we are going through a process which sees the former colonial masters in France refusing to accept the new reality. And so on that premise alone, obviously there's going to be a need to completely pivot and reorient the general outlook in as far as relationship with other countries are concerned. It's a matter of national sovereignty and I would say a survival necessity. It's a divorce, and like in any divorce, it's a complicated period where you have to item per item, go through redistribution of the household estate, you know, in a more equitable manner, and you have to decide who's going to have the custody of the kids. But once that process is completed, you know, and time has gone by, because time heals, you know, there's no reason for those relationships to not be renewed. One last thing I would like to put forward is also the representation that Africans have of themselves. And Yulia somewhat alluded to it when she mentioned governance and logistics. Yes, of course, you need infrastructure and you need to have a legal security for investors and all this. This is the veneer of you know, the configuration, as it were. But it's also very important that Africans reclaim for themselves the rich history of the continent going back thousands of years, built on imperial and great empires that existed on Africa, and that you know, would put some of those European countries to shame, as it were, if we compare, you know, what was going on the continent back in those days compared to what was going on in Europe. And so it's important not to allow this kind of ideology, this I hate that term, but you know, I guess it's the closest that comes to mind, this indigenous third worlder ideology peddled by the Western left, as far as African is concerned. This kind of paternalism, you have to get rid of this. And Africans have to create a new generation of scribes and storytellers, because only through the storytelling may contemporary African reclaim for themselves a sense of you know, who they are, where they come from, and from that point where they're going.
Absolutely.
And it's important. It's even more important if you look at the obstacle created by those arbitrarily drawn borders, you know, stemming from the colonial era. They are, you know, you have ethnic groups that are, you know, spread over several countries, not unlike what we see in the Middle East with the Kurdish people, for instance, but not only. And so this is something that the West, and if we go by what some of the statements that were issued by the head of, you might call it the Joint Chief of Staff of France and the Joint Chief of Staff of the US, they intend to, you know, reinvest Africa in the next century, whether through major financial investment, but mostly we can guess what it really means. It means an attempt to reassert colonial domination. And so it's urgent that in order for those challenges to be met head on, that Africans reclaim for themselves who they are, and don't be afraid to, you know, wrestle back those narratives that have been imposed upon contemporary youth in Africa by certain Western agents who present themselves as saviors, as it were. And it's very, in that sense, insidious, because it somehow nurtures and feeds into this narrative that Africans cannot do anything on their own. This is something that needs to be put to a stop. Africans don't need anybody to understand who they are, their potential, their rich history, and you know, they don't want to be treated as children. And so I think this is a very important issue. It does not bear on economics, it does not bear on infrastructure, it does not bear on the ability to militarily preserve your sovereignty and, by extension, your economic resources. But it is fundamental because it creates this common thread around which the younger generation in Africa in the 21st century is first of all characterized by you know, high demographics, and so we need to provide something for those youth. Otherwise, they will be tempted to go back to the, you know, fundamentals of what this subculture, American subculture, offers the rest of the world for decades now, which is not, you know, something over the long run that I think is sustainable for African, but not only Africans, as it were.
And it is quite imperative for African political stakeholders, particularly, to understand the principles and the dictates of international relations, to be able to internalize or contextualize some of its values, to probably provide a greater scope in its diplomatic strategies. And coming back to you, Priestley, EKANE, you quite mentioned earlier about the bargaining tools. You mentioned sovereignty, the military might, and others, including governance. I would quite take an example, because when President Paul Kagame was talking some years ago, pertaining the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I think the leader that many pundits feel like has understood the dictates of international diplomacy, said, if the United Nations peacekeeping force can be in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo for over 30 years, and yet the solution has never been found, then why should Rwanda withdraw, or why should Rwanda not stay there until there is a solution? So let's try to probably look at some of these, hidden diplomacy that is probably embedded in conflict across the African continent, and see how there is some sort of reawakening or that consciousness coming from the political leaders. How can we actually, or maybe what parameters can we use to where some of these invisible diplomatic tendencies that are intended to keep Africa trapped, while maybe taking what we call today Africa's natural resources for personal interest, like we've underlined already. Diplomacy is about, again, a game of interest.
Yeah, thank you once more for having me on the program. As you clearly mentioned, I talked about the need for military strength, the need for sovereignty in order to engage Africa on a legitimate base on the international scene. But all of that, I think it would be the end game in order to achieve the broader picture. There is none of that. We cannot even start talking of Africa's diplomacy if we cannot even revisit and redefine who we are as a people. It's Sheikh Anta Diop who once mentioned that a people without a historical conscience are people not able to engage the future. So it is important that we as Africans get to understand who we are, and that we don't always delve into emotions and theories in order to engage the rest of the world. And my co-panelist, Dr. ENOAKU, said moments ago that this idea of breaking pacts, breaking cooperations agreements, breaking bilateral or multilateral ties based on the idea of looking back in anger, colonialism, it's not working. It's not working because we must focus more on what is in it for us. It's not because of France or other Western countries as Germany or the Great Britain or which other country was involved in the colonial process that you engage in an abrupt end of diplomatic or cooperation partnerships. The focus should be on what do we stand to gain in engaging in multilateral cooperation with a certain organization or bilateral cooperation with certain countries. Is what is in it for us as a government, for us as institutions, for us as a people. What does that benefit our communities? What does that benefit our societies? How does that benefit our governments and institutions? That should be the focus. Meaning, 50 or 60 years after colonialism, today Africa has the luminaries. Africa has the thinkers. Africa has the population, the educated masses, able to understand that if we want to engage in the partnership agreement, if we want to engage in the trade deal, we're not looking at the fact that because we have to deal with France or Great Britain that we're not going to do it. As long as that partnership would ensure running water in our communities, we don't mind. As long as that trade agreement is going to create employment to people in our communities, we don't mind. We are on an international platform where our interests should be regarded, and that's why I have a problem with people with our school of thought sometimes advancing theories as exclusive theories. Sometimes you have the Afrocentrist. There's no centric thought, because even in centricism there should be openness. We live in a global world. It means Afrocentrism, Pan-Africanism, it's of course upholding those values that are typical, that are proper for your continent or for your people, but stretch out your hands to take whatever in order to be able to engage your voice on the international scene. And that is why theories as the functionalist theories is very important. Meaning, for example, if we're talking about sub-regional groupings and regional groupings, if these blocks do not constitute in a way that they could project on the continental level, and then the continental bloc, which makes up 54 countries, is able to project the voice of the global scene, it's not going to work. I take an example of the EU, for example. When the EU does not make decisions on basis of singularity, Germany does not. You have laws. You have EU laws that apply to all the EU countries. You have a European diplomacy. You have a European military strategy, and you cannot understand how a continent, which is the most successful political grouping, the only region in the world that has succeeded to have its 54 nations under a continental umbrella, is unable to project a shared voice on the international scene, then there is a problem. Is unable to handle intra and intertribal wars. There is a problem. That state of affairs does not even allow a possibility to project a voice on the international scene. So talk is easy. I think Africans, we have the natural resources, we have the material resources, we have the human resources. So I think when I sit back and I reflect at on how a continent in its diversity, in its multiculturality, in its multidimensional power, in quotes, is not able, to project a voice on the international scene, I want to think that the problem is elsewhere. The problem is in deconstructing the African mentalities.
Absolutely.
And it's in deconstructing the African mentalities and building a new set of thinkers who will think for Africa and who will think from Africa into the world. Take, for example, I take a little example. 2 days ago, I think, we had this meeting in the White House, and we had a president, we had Donald Trump questioning or making a grim mockery at the state, as a president whom he thought was very expressive in English. I would have expected voices, and not voice, like I don't like to see Africa. I don't like to put ourselves on. I don't like to view Africans as the marginals of the world, like the crybaby of the world. But somehow there could have been a joint statement somehow by, I don't know, by African leaders to say, hey, that. I mean, to give back a piece of this guy, you know. But, I mean, how would someone judge a person in Liberia? Of course, English is the official language in Liberia, but it's not the first language. We have our indigenous languages.
Absolutely,
The fact that
yeah.
I could be, yeah, the fact that I could be expressive in English doesn't make me. That's not where I should be judged. I have Bakosi, which is my language, and that is my power. We have the Mandingas, you have the Swahilis. That is our power. And I think we, in the 21st century, we should take all of this. We should take all of this, wherever it's coming from the south to the north. We take all of this and constitute our power. And that is only when you have a shared voice, when you have a shared power, when you can produce a language of communication, when you have a cultural strength, then you can start talking about a diplomatic, strong voice on the global scene.
Which is very imperative, and it brings us to the next question, which we had to actually analyze. I would love for Dr. Elijah ENOAKU to dwell more on this. Is this problem embedded in the era of colonialization? Because we are looking at an African trying to emancipate, yet they feel constrained by some of the ideologies, or probably let's use the term mindset constraint. So now you quite mentioned the EU and how it works, and also the situation at the White House. We know that it has become some of probably President Trump's political rhetorics to ensure that he maybe, I don't know if I should use the word embarrass leaders in public to be able to curtail their political power. And it brings us again to this diplomatic move that African countries are taking, and some of the constraints with you, Dr. Elijah. Let's look at some of the dilemmas, practical dilemmas that African countries, probably under the banner of the African Union, are dealing with in their quest to be more diplomatically and strategically present, especially at the international arena. Hello, Dr. ENOAKU. I think while waiting for him to come back, it's time for us to welcome Dr. Eddie Erika, and I think he can throw more light on the very question, looking at where the core problem of the Africa is that is probably impeding its smooth, diplomatic trajectory. To note that Dr. Eddie Eric is a global politics analyst and executive